Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Connor Brady restored a forgotten 600-acre estate, he thought the battle was over. But peace shattered when a ruthless HOA president arrived, armed with forged maps, fake history, and suburban arrogance. What began as a land dispute turned into a high-stakes war for truth and legacy. I had spent 3 long years and more money than I cared to admit, breathing life back into an estate that most people in town had written off as a rotting monument to the past. 600 acres of overgrown fields, collapsing barns, and a Georgian-style house that had survived the Civil War, but not the humidity of Virginia summers. The place was called Briarstone Hall, built in 1847, passed down through a string of notable families, and left to decay sometime around the 1970s. When I first set foot on the property, the front steps were cracked, the roofline sagged like an old mare, and raccoons had declared squatters' rights in the attic. But to me, it wasn't ruin. It was history waiting to be restored. I'm a specialist in international land disputes, which sounds glamorous until you've spent half your career in dusty courthouses arguing over drainage easements and survey errors. I'd built a career untangling property chaos in other countries. Restoring Briarstone was my way of reclaiming something personal, something solid that no bureaucrat could touch. I spent every weekend driving down from Richmond, hammer in hand, replacing beams, rewiring old copper, fighting termites, and learning that patience and caulk can solve most of life's problems. When the last section of wrought iron fencing went up along the western line, I stood there watching the welders finish their work and felt a satisfaction I hadn't known in years. The day I moved in for good, I walked the perimeter with my foreman, checking the cameras, sensors, and motion lights. It looked like something between a heritage site and a fortress. Every post had a polished brass plaque that read, "Private Estate, not part of any HOA." I didn't think anyone would misinterpret that. I had seen what homeowners associations could do, petty tyrannies dressed up as community management. I wanted no part of it. The nearest development, Ridgefield Hills, sat half a mile away. A collection of brick and vinyl McMansions with matching mailboxes and lawns, so uniform they looked AI-generated. My property predated that entire subdivision by more than a century. The line between us wasn't blurred. It was written into the county records like the 10 Commandments. For the first week, life was blissfully quiet. I woke to fog lifting off the valley, sipped coffee on the porch, and pretended I didn't have emails piling up from half a dozen state courts that wanted my opinion on boundary law. Then, on the 7th morning, a silver SUV rolled up to my gate. The cameras pinged, and I saw a woman in her late 50s step out carrying a leather folder and the kind of confidence that usually comes with a clipboard. She was dressed in that suburban armor, pastel blouse, pearl earrings, hair shellacked into immobility. She pressed the intercom button like she was ringing for a servant. "Good morning," she said, her voice crisp and rehearsed. "I'm Karen Van Clift, president of the Ridgefield Hills Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your property boundaries." I nearly laughed into the microphone. "Do we? Because as far as I'm aware, my boundaries are 600 acres of not your problem." Unfazed, she smiled with that polite menace common to people who've never been told no. "According to our development records, a portion of your land, roughly 200 acres along the southern ridge, was part of the original Ridgefield Community Plan. That means technically your estate falls under our jurisdiction." I buzzed the gate speaker again. "Ma'am, I'm a land dispute consultant. I spend my days testifying in court about people who don't know where their property ends. Believe me, I know mine. This estate was surveyed in 1882. Resurveyed in 1956, and registered again when I purchased it. If you think you own an inch of it, I wish you the best of luck proving that in a courtroom." Her smile didn't falter. "We prefer to resolve these things amicably, Mr. Brady." "It's Brady," I corrected. "Connor Brady, and I prefer to resolve them permanently. Have a good day." She hesitated, clearly unused to doors, literal or figurative, being closed in her face. "You'll be hearing from us," she said finally. I watched her drive off down the gravel road, tires crunching like grinding teeth. I figured that was the end of it. Another HOA president testing the waters, realizing she was out of her depth, and moving on to nag someone about mailbox paint. Still, I had the gate log saved, just in case. Old habit. That evening, as I walked the grounds with my dog, Ranger. The valley glowed gold in the fading light. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. And for a moment, everything felt unshakable. I'd built this place from dust. No suburban committee was going to lay a finger on it. I locked the gates, checked the cameras one last time, and told myself the past 3 years had been worth every blister and sleepless night. If I'd known how persistent Karen Van Clift could be, I might have built the fence 10 feet higher and topped it with barbed wire. 2 weeks after that charming visit from Karen Van Clift, I was halfway through organizing my historical property archive, everything from original blueprints to Civil War-era letters found sealed in a loose brick behind the fireplace, when a plain manila envelope arrived via certified mail. No return address, just a county stamp and a signature I didn't recognize. It was from the office of the Shenandoah County Registrar. I opened it expecting some routine document, maybe confirmation of a boundary reaffirmation I'd filed years back. Instead, I found a cover letter stating that a historical review is being conducted to clarify a discrepancy in recorded subdivision boundaries affecting your property. Attached was a black and white scan of what was supposedly an original Ridgefield Community Expansion Plan, dated 1967. I stared at the map for a long moment, not because I believed it, but because I couldn't believe someone thought I would. It showed my land, specifically the southern 200 acres, faintly outlined as Phase 3 expansion zone. There was even a penciled-in cul-de-sac loop where my Oak Grove currently stood. According to this map, that section of my estate had never been excluded from the HOA. It had simply never been developed. The problem? I recognized the font immediately. Arial Rounded, created in 1982. The map was labeled with parcel numbers that weren't even in use until digital zoning formats came in during the early 90s. The seal of the county surveyor's office had the wrong emblem. It wasn't just fake. It was offensively bad at being fake. I called the registrar's office. The clerk who answered sounded nervous when I asked how they obtained the document. It was submitted by a representative from Ridgefield Hills Homeowners Association, she said, apparently recovered from a municipal archive box that hadn't been digitized. Did anyone from your office verify it? I asked. There was a pause. Well, not yet. That's part of the review process. It was flagged because it contradicts your last recorded plat. No kidding, I muttered. I asked her to flag the file, and I requested a formal administrative hearing to challenge the validity of the submission. Then I hung up and got to work. First, I called the forensic document analyst I'd worked with on a zoning case in Oregon. Then I contacted a historical cartographer from Richmond who owed me a favor. Within 72 hours, I had 3 separate reports confirming the obvious. The map was printed on modern inkjet paper, the seal had been digitally cloned from a brochure, and the street names listed in the diagram didn't exist until a post-2000 expansion to Ridgefield. But I didn't stop there. I drove to the county archive myself, requested the original municipal storage logs for the box where the document had supposedly been found. There was no record of any map being stored there. The archive staff were helpful, if sheepish, and promised to make a note of the discrepancy. I scanned the map into my system and layered it over satellite data, my deed, and the USGS topographic maps dating back to the 1950s. The result? The document didn't match any known boundary scheme in state or federal records. It was an amateur forgery, but the intent was anything but amateur. Someone wanted to shake the legal foundation of my ownership, and they were hoping to use institutional confusion to do it. I knew exactly who that someone was. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the county clerk and submitted all my evidence. I also hand-delivered a cease and desist notice to the Ridgefield Hills HOA, addressed to Karen Van Clift personally, citing fraudulent misrepresentation of legal documents under Virginia Code Paragraph 18-168. I copied the county prosecutor's office for good measure. I didn't expect immediate fireworks, but I wanted it on record that I wasn't going to play defense anymore. That same evening, as I reviewed security footage from the week before, an old habit, I noticed a flash of movement along my southern fence line. I rewound and zoomed in. There she was, Karen in hiking boots and a wide-brimmed hat, pacing just inside the tree line with a clipboard, alone, measuring distances with a digital laser rangefinder and marking a tree with orange spray paint. I exhaled through my nose and poured myself a glass of bourbon. She wasn't just trying to bluff me into submission. She was prepping the land, measuring, planning. She thought she was building a case. Or worse, laying the groundwork for something much dumber. I sent a digital copy of the footage to my attorney, then posted stills to an encrypted drive labeled HOA Idiocy Archive. Part of me hoped that would be the end of it, that maybe she'd realize how far out of her league she was. But deep down, I knew better. It was early morning, just past 6, when my phone pinged with a motion alert from Camera 7, the southern perimeter. I was upstairs shaving, one cheek still covered in foam, when I glanced at the screen and saw a live feed of 2 men in reflective vests crouching near the wrought iron fence I'd paid a fortune to restore. They weren't lost hikers. One of them was operating a cordless angle grinder, and sparks were flying. I didn't bother rinsing my face. I was down the stairs in 10 seconds, out the door in 30, and barreling across the lawn in my truck, the engine still cold and rattling. I took the gravel path through the east field to save time. By the time I reached the south ridge, they'd already cut through one of the older fence sections and were laying down plastic stakes and a nylon line like they were mapping a damn footpath. I slammed on the brakes, got out, and shouted over the grind of the power tools. "Stop what you're doing! Right now!" The men froze like raccoons in a spotlight. One of them, mid-30s, goatee, clipboard tucked under his arm, stepped forward, hands raised. "Sir, we're with Ridgefield Hills HOA. We were told this was community-owned land. We're just here to mark a path for public access. There's supposed to be a future greenway here." I looked at the hole in the fence, the orange survey flags, the spray-painted tree trunks, and then I looked at him. "Who told you to cut through private fencing?" I said. Mrs. Van Clift, sir. She said the HOA's legal team had determined this land was disputed and that you'd been notified." I took a breath to stop myself from laughing. "First," I said, "this land is not disputed. Second, even if it were, which it is not, you don't cut through someone's fence and start staking trails unless you enjoy felony charges. And third," I paused, taking a photo of the work crew, the broken fence, and the orange line across my land. "You've just committed criminal trespass under Code Psogurv 18.2.121, and that lovely angle grinder is now considered a tool used in the commission of civil damage." I called the sheriff's office immediately, kept the camera rolling, and advised the workers not to move an inch. To their credit, they didn't bolt. Maybe they realized they'd been set up. Maybe they'd had enough run-ins with angry landowners to know when to stand still and look apologetic. Deputy McClendon showed up 20 minutes later, a no-nonsense guy with a buzz cut and an excellent sense of property law. I handed him a printed copy of my deed, pointed out the old survey pins in the ground, and showed him the footage from 3 separate camera angles. McClendon turned to the workers. "You boys got paperwork for access?" They shook their heads. "She said it was handled," one of them mumbled. "Yeah, well, she was wrong." The deputy took their statements, confiscated the tools, and filed an incident report on the spot. No arrests, yet, but I knew damn well this wasn't over. After the crew left with their tail between their legs, McClendon stayed behind to help me file a formal trespass complaint and issue a civil citation against Ridgefield Hills HOA as the contracting entity. "You've had trouble with them before?" he asked. "Let's just say their president has a creative relationship with the truth," I replied. "Then I'd keep that camera footage backed up. Things like this have a way of escalating." I nodded. He wasn't wrong. Later that day, I reviewed the security footage again, frame by frame. I found something I hadn't noticed before. A black Range Rover parked off the road, behind a tree line, headlights off. It was positioned with a perfect view of the fence. I zoomed in. In the front seat, barely lit, I could make out the silhouette of a woman holding a phone. I didn't need facial recognition to know it was Karen Van Clift. She hadn't just ordered the intrusion, she'd watched it in real time. I compiled everything: stills, timestamps, tool model numbers, contractor ID badges, and the partial license plate of Karen's vehicle. I emailed the packet to my lawyer and to a contact in the county commissioner's office. I labeled it Phase 2, Documented Aggression. That evening, I updated the southern perimeter, installed reinforced panels, upped the voltage on the non-lethal deterrent wiring, and mounted a solar-powered spotlight facing the trail line. Then I placed a new sign at the cut fence, big, clean, and impossible to misinterpret. No trespassing, private property. HOA activity prohibited by order of owner. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. For good measure, I added a QR code linking to a hosted video of the trespass event, complete with narration. 2 hours later, the video had 5,000 views. By the next morning, it had 20,000. HOA members from nearby neighborhoods started commenting. Some were horrified, some were amused. One wrote, "This is why I moved to the woods. I hadn't planned on making this public, but if Karen wanted a land war, I was happy to let the court of public opinion watch it unfold in high definition." 3 days after the fence incident, just as I was finalizing my trespass countersuit with my lawyer, I received a hand-delivered envelope stamped with the official seal of the Shenandoah County Civil Court. The courier, a middle-aged man in a windbreaker, handed it over with the kind of tired expression that suggested he'd delivered this sort of nonsense before. "Mr. Brady," he asked. "Brady," I corrected out of habit, already eyeing the envelope like it might hiss. "Thanks." Inside was a full legal complaint, 32 pages thick, filed by none other than the Ridgefield Hills Homeowners Association. The plaintiff was listed as Karen Van Clift, president. 4 counts. Count 1, unlawful possession of disputed community land. Count 2, fraudulent registration of private property as personal ownership. Count 3, illegal obstruction of historic right-of-way used by Ridgefield residents since the early 20th century. Count 4, denial of access to historically protected cultural site. Ridgefield Community Bathing Grounds, Aestheter, 1923. I sat down in my reading chair and leafed through the pages with the disbelief of a man watching a slow-motion car crash involving a clown car and a chemical truck. It wasn't just a poorly built case. It was a fever dream stapled into legal format. The filing claimed I was only leasing the estate, not owning it, and that my title deed had been erroneously recorded due to a clerical oversight during the subdivision transfer of 1986. It accused me of deliberately misrepresenting ownership status and knowingly constructing a barrier that prevents Ridgefield families from accessing their traditional recreation zones. They attached maps, photos, sworn statements. One particularly rich attachment was a digitally aged newspaper article titled "Locals Flock to Ridgefield's New Bathing Spot," dated July 1923. Featuring a photoshopped black and white image of women in swimming bonnets and wicker chairs beside what I knew for a fact was my western pond, a man-made water feature installed in 1981. Another photo showed what they claimed to be remnants of a historical dock structure, which, upon close inspection, was clearly a pile of rotted pallets dumped by some hunter decades ago. It wasn't even near the water. As I turned each page, I could feel my lawyer Samantha Yates fuming through the phone before I even called her. When I finally did, she listened in silence as I read off the key charges. Then came her response. "Jesus Christ, Connor, this isn't a lawsuit. It's a hallucination." I know. Do they think the court won't verify these claims? Half this stuff could be debunked by a 6th grader with Google Earth and a brain cell. They've got fake maps, fake photos, and now they're claiming historical bathing rights? Next week, they'll say the Queen of England used to own your greenhouse. We agreed to file an aggressive response. Samantha started assembling an evidence portfolio that would make a federal auditor weep. Meanwhile, I took my own steps. I requested authenticated aerial photos from the United States Geological Survey, covering every decade since 1940. I contacted the Virginia Department of Historic Resources to verify that no such bathing ground had ever been registered. I even reached out to the family who owned the estate in the 1960s. They remembered the pond well, mostly because their uncle nearly drowned in it trying to rescue a goat. Then came the kicker. That evening, I received a tip from a Ridgefield resident who'd seen the HOA's official announcement on their private neighborhood forum. Someone had leaked it to me. The message read, "Dear residents, as many of you know, the Ridgefield Hills HOA has filed a legal petition to reclaim rightful access to historical areas currently blocked by a neighboring landholder. These areas include the former Ridgefield Recreation Site and historic bathing trail. Once resolved, this expansion may allow the community to develop new amenities and walking paths for shared use. Your patience is appreciated. K. Van Clift, HOA President." So that's what this was. Not nostalgia, not civic duty. It was land grabbing, dressed up in nostalgia and fake history, and sold to the board as a community development opportunity. I posted the entire lawsuit, scanned and annotated, on a private server labeled HOA Fiction Theater. I sent copies to every local property rights group, a few real estate attorneys I knew, and 3 journalists with an unhealthy interest in suburban corruption. But I wasn't done. 2 days later, Karen showed up again, this time in a navy pantsuit with matching folder and a man trailing behind her in a tan blazer. I met them both at the gate, arms crossed. "This is Thomas Eckhart," she said, "legal counsel for Ridgefield Hills." Eckhart extended a hand. I did not shake. "Mr. Brady, we're here to offer you a compromise." I raised an eyebrow. "You voluntarily remove the southern fencing," he continued, "and allow limited pedestrian access to the trail in question. In exchange, the HOA will drop its claim regarding the disputed acreage and settle the matter privately." "And what do I get in return?" I asked. Karen smiled. "Peace and goodwill." I let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then I leaned in slightly and said, "I'm going to destroy you in court, Karen. And I'm going to do it with your own fake bathhouse photos, your forged maps, and every document you've submitted since the day you decided to trespass on my land." Eckhart cleared his throat. "There's no need for hostility." "You brought hostility," I snapped. "I brought facts. You can leave now." They turned and left. I watched them go, then turned to camera 4 and gave it a slow, deliberate thumbs up. The storm had landed, but I wasn't the one getting wet. 3 days after the not-so-subtle threat from Karen and her briefcase-carrying lackey, I noticed the motion alert from camera 6 just after 5:30 in the morning. I was nursing black coffee in the kitchen barefoot, watching fog roll over the pastures when my phone buzzed. Camera 6 covers the southern fence line, the same area they tried to breach 2 weeks prior. At first, I figured it was a deer or a particularly confused turkey, but the moment I tapped into the live feed, my stomach went ice cold. 3 trucks, 2 unmarked white pickups, and a flatbed carrying what looked suspiciously like a Bobcat backhoe, and a team of 6 men in neon vests, hard hats, and tool belts standing just inside the roadside ditch like they were about to start landscaping someone's front yard. One of them held rolled blueprints. Another was unloading an angle grinder. They weren't there to trim hedges. I dialed my head of security, Frank, who answered mid-yawn. "Wake up. We've got intruders. Southern fence line. Bring the team and cameras, and grab the copies of the property deed and the cease and desist letter." By the time I drove down the gravel path in my truck, Frank and his 2 men had already reached the fence. I rolled up just as one of the contractors, a tall guy with wraparound sunglasses and a Ridgefield HOA ID badge clipped to his belt, started to mark the wrought iron bars with orange chalk. "Morning," I said loudly, stepping out of the vehicle. All 6 of them froze like I'd caught them stealing Christmas gifts. "Can I ask what exactly you gentlemen are doing on private property with industrial tools at sunrise?" The man with the chalk stepped forward, clearly rehearsed. "We've been authorized by Ridgefield Hills HOA to begin path installation along the historic Ridgefield Foot Trail. You should have been notified." I held up the laminated copy of my property survey. "This entire area, all the way to that line of oak trees, is my land. You are trespassing under Virginia Code 602. That means you're committing an act of criminal trespass with civil intent to damage." Another man shifted uncomfortably. "We were told this was community land. You were told wrong, and I suggest you tell whoever signed your work order that we've got 8 high-definition cameras watching your every move, and that local law enforcement is already en route." Right on cue, I saw the cruiser crest the hill. Sheriff Dale Madsen himself stepped out, adjusting his duty belt with the resigned look of a man who knew this HOA saga was about to become his full-time job. "Morning, Connor," he said with a nod, then turned to the crew. "What's going on here?" The lead contractor tried again. "We were hired to install public trail access." "That's not public land," Dale interrupted, pointing to my laminated survey. "And I've already seen this map before." He turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" "Damn right, I do." I handed over the documents. Notarized deed, surveyor's report, the earlier cease and desist. Madsen reviewed them, sighed, and then looked to the contractors. "You're all being detained for trespass under Code 602. You're lucky nothing's been damaged yet. Hand over your IDs, leave the tools, and line up at the back of the pickup." As they complied, one of them mumbled, "They said this was HOA land." "And who exactly is they?" I asked. The guy shrugged. Some woman named Karen. Of course. I filmed the entire process, the arrest, the seizure of equipment, the sheriff reading them their rights. Not for YouTube. Not yet. This was evidence, and I wanted it preserved in every format known to man. MP4, raw surveillance, USB copies in 2 fireproof safes. I even backed it up to an encrypted cloud drive labeled HOA Clown Circus PT2. After the crew was escorted off, Dale gave me a long look. You realize this isn't going to stop here, right? I know. She's either nuts or desperate. Both, I said. But she's also sloppy, and I can use that. Frank came up beside me, holding one of the discarded blueprints. You're gonna want to see this, he muttered. I unrolled the document and immediately saw red. It was a site plan and stamped with the Ridgefield Hills HOA logo, showing a proposed expansion of the community trail network. But what really got my attention were the faint pencil notes in the margins. Phase 1. Trail to pond. Phase 2. Future gazebo site. And most damning, long-term, propose zoning appeal if property not vacated. I photographed every inch of it. Later that night, I scanned the blueprints, annotated them with legal references, and prepared another packet for Samantha, my attorney. Her response the next morning was brief and gleeful. This is conspiracy-grade stupidity. Let's go nuclear. I wasn't just dealing with Karen anymore. I was dealing with an entire board of HOA fanatics who thought they could manifest destiny their way across private land by weaponizing bureaucracy and forged nostalgia. But I had something they didn't: the truth. And 8 very expensive, very well-placed cameras. It was exactly 9 days after the fence-cutting incident when the envelope arrived, thick, cream-colored, with an embossed return address from a law firm in Richmond I'd never heard of. A courier in a suit handed it to my assistant and said with visible discomfort, "You've been served." I opened it on the porch, sitting under the iron arch that still bore the scorch marks from the torch attempt. Inside was a packet of legal absurdity that would have made Lewis Carroll proud. The Ridgefield Hills Homeowners Association v. Connor Brady, a civil complaint filed in Shenandoah County Court requesting immediate injunctive relief and forensic title review. They were suing me, but not just for one thing. Count 1 claimed that I was illegally withholding lands historically zoned as communal Ridgefield territory, citing their mysterious old master plan from the 1960s, the same fabricated document I'd already debunked with expert testimony and 2 notarized chain of title analyses. Yet here it was again, repackaged and resubmitted as new evidence. Count 2 alleged that my ownership claim was void because I had only leased the estate temporarily from the prior owner and had mistakenly registered title due to administrative oversight. They'd included a single-page affidavit from a supposed former clerk who mysteriously claimed the 2021 land sale may not have been finalized correctly. No name, no contact, just initials and a shaky signature. Count 3 took it further. They claimed my perimeter fencing was unlawfully obstructing an ancestral community access road that, according to a grainy black and white photo, had once led to the public bathhouse and swimming pond of Ridgefield's original founders. This, I recognized instantly, was Karen's fantasy recreation of a community that never existed. And finally, Count 4, the cherry on top, accused me of malicious obstruction of historic public access to a site of documented social heritage, the aforementioned bathhouse, now supposedly protected under the 1929 Ridgefield Cultural Preservation Clause. There is no such clause. There was never a bathhouse. And if there had been, it wouldn't have been 30 acres into a fenced, privately titled estate first surveyed during the presidency of Andrew Johnson. I called Samantha and read her the highlights. She listened in silence, then asked calmly, "Did they actually file it, or is this an intimidation stunt?" "It's real," I said, flipping to the end. Stamped by the Shenandoah Circuit Court clerk. Hearing set for next Thursday. I scanned and sent her the documents. An hour later, I got her response. "Connor, this isn't just bad lawyering, it's fraud. They're citing forged evidence again. If the judge lets it go to hearing, we go scorched earth." That night, I began assembling our arsenal. We already had the certified title chain stretching back 136 years. We had expert statements from 2 surveyors and a retired Virginia archivist confirming no such bathhouse ever existed. But we needed more. I wanted the judge to laugh this thing out of court before Karen could bat an eyelash. I drove to Richmond myself and pulled records from the State Library, the U.S. Geological Survey's 1940s topography scans, and a military aerial archive from World War II showing the estate's tree line, uninterrupted, untouched. On my way back, I got a call from Frank. He sounded pissed. "You're going to want to check your gate cam." Somebody was snooping around in a suit. Said he was from the Office of Heritage Enforcement. That's not even a real department. Exactly. We got his plate, recorded his face. He walked around like he was about to declare the place a national monument. I pulled over and watched the footage. Middle-aged man, blazer, clipboard, sunglasses at dusk. He poked at the gates, took pictures, then scribbled something and left. Probably hired by Karen, possibly related to the lawsuit. This was no longer about land. This was a siege. Samantha filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, attaching 15 exhibits, including forensic ink analysis on the bathhouse plan and metadata proving the newspaper scans were printed on a Canon Pro X in April of this year. But the opposing counsel doubled down. They submitted 2 more affidavits, one from a local historian who turned out to be Karen's cousin, and one from a photo expert who had previously worked for a company called Memories Reimagined, a firm specializing in digital photo restorations. Both were laughable. Both were about to be dissected in open court. As we prepped, I couldn't help but admire the sheer audacity. They were trying to annex land not with bulldozers, but with nostalgia, Photoshop, and bureaucratic fantasy. And they picked the one person on the eastern seaboard who makes a living tearing that kind of nonsense apart in front of judges. By the end of that week, I had 3 servers of evidence, 4 sworn depositions, and a growing list of HOA board members tied to this circus. Karen wanted war. Fine. I was done being polite. The courtroom was packed tighter than a church revival. Reporters lined the back wall. Karen stood in a navy blue pantsuit 2 rows ahead of me, smiling like a substitute teacher about to confiscate a phone. I sat beside Samantha, our laptop humming with video files, geodata, and scanned evidence. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a live autopsy of HOA fraud. The judge, an older woman with sharp glasses and zero tolerance for nonsense, opened the session by asking the plaintiff to summarize their complaint. Karen's lawyer launched into a monologue about ancestral rights, historic water access, and decades of communal stewardship. He ended with a dramatic line. "Your Honor, the defendant has erected illegal gates on sacred ground." Samantha didn't flinch. When our turn came, she stood and dropped a thick binder of certified documents on the table. "Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate, with irrefutable evidence, that this complaint is based entirely on forged documents, fabricated history, and strategic harassment." Exhibit by exhibit, we took it apart. The historic bathhouse. Satellite photos from 1943 through 2024 showed forest, nothing else. The 1923 newspaper, printed with a modern Canon Pro X printer using fonts created in the 2000s. The former clerk, who claimed the land sale was invalid, a ghost. No employment records, no address. The judge raised her brow higher with each piece of evidence. Samantha played the drone footage showing Karen spray painting the so-called ancestral trail. Then we revealed the email, the one where Karen wrote to her board, "If he gives up even 100 acres, we can rezone and claim easement access. We just need to squeeze him." That was the moment the courtroom shifted. The judge leaned back, tapped her pen, and said, "This is not a property dispute. This is a pattern of fraudulent behavior." She scheduled a follow-up hearing and warned HOA counsel that she was considering sanctions. NBC picked it up that evening. I stood on my porch with a news crew, holding up the forged plan and saying, "This is what HOA overreach looks like, weaponized nostalgia and Photoshop." The clip went viral overnight. Messages flooded in. Landowners across the country, attorneys, even former HOA members who'd been pushed out. I didn't respond to all of them, but one stood out. A retired federal prosecutor who offered to connect me with a state-level fraud investigation unit. Karen, meanwhile, tried to control the damage. She hosted a press conference claiming she had acted in good faith. But reporters weren't buying it. Within days, 2 Ridgefield board members resigned, and local newspapers demanded a full audit of HOA operations. Back home, I posted my own video. Just facts. The lawsuit, the fake documents, the footage. No rants. Just a title. Private property means private. It hit 4 million views in a week. And somewhere in the background, I knew This wasn't just about me anymore. The final hearing came with a storm. Thunder cracked over the Blue Ridge as I pulled up to the courthouse, a quiet reminder from the universe that reckoning was overdue. Inside, the tension had calcified. Karen sat flanked by two new lawyers, younger, stiffer, less sure of her than the last batch. Her smile had evaporated. All that remained was the brittle confidence of someone who thought the rules were bendable until they snapped back. The judge began with no ceremony. After reviewing the complete record, this court finds clear and deliberate fraud perpetrated by the Ridgefield Hills HOA, namely through falsification of historical records, trespass with intent to claim, and coordinated attempts to undermine rightful property ownership. She didn't even look at Karen as she spoke the next part. This court issues a permanent injunction barring Ridgefield Hills HOA from claiming any right, easement, or interest over the Brady estate. Furthermore, the HOA is to be dissolved within 60 days pending audit and its assets seized for investigation. Karen turned to stone. And as for Ms. Karen Van Clift, the judge's voice slowed. This court refers the matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution under Virginia Code. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and attempted unlawful appropriation of private land. A gasp moved through the room. Karen finally looked at me. Not with hatred, not even panic, just the flat, defeated expression of someone who finally realized the world wouldn't bend to her will. Outside, reporters swarmed her as she was escorted into a black SUV. I stayed behind. I had no victory speech in me, just exhaustion, and the quiet satisfaction of watching a parasite lose its grip. Back at the estate, I did something simple. I had a new marble plaque installed near the gate, elegant serif font, black on white, private estate. EST, 1847, not part of any HOA. No trespassing. It didn't gloat. It just stood its ground, like the land always had. The video I uploaded afterward, just courtroom footage, satellite overlays, the judge's verdict, passed 5 million views. I didn't need to narrate it. The facts were enough. Karen's face as the verdict was read said more than I ever could. A week later, I was contacted by a coalition of independent landowners who'd seen the case and wanted me to consult on their battles across the country. I agreed, not because I needed the money, but because I was done watching people like Karen chip away at what's supposed to be sacred: boundaries, rights, legacy. I still live here, still wake up to mist over the trees, birdsong bouncing off iron gates, and the peace of knowing that for the first time in years, no one is trying to steal what's mine. And sometimes, just for the hell of it, I rewatch the moment the judge said, "This is not a property dispute. This is fraud." She was right, and the land remembers.